Anyone who uses the word
part of the
authentic, you
problem.
know it's inauthentic.
If you can't
Exactly.
fake authenticity, what can you fake?
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Tuesday, July 1st. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are Real Clear Politics co-founder and president Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. Well, gentlemen, the Senate passed the big, beautiful bill today. Vice President J.D. Vance stepped in to provide the 51st vote as 3 Republican senators voted against it. The bill now goes to the House. Tom, you predicted this would get through the Senate. Do you think it gets through the House as well?
I do, but you can just see how hard this is. I mean, it barely passed the House the first time around. It barely passed the Senate, barely moved forward to be considered by the Senate. And then J.D. Vance had to break the tie. I mean, they literally had no votes to spare, and they had to do a deal with, Lisa Murkowski to keep her from voting no. It was very, very reminiscent of 2009 and Obamacare. Remember the Cornhusker kickback? I mean, Harry Reid was doing backdoor deals he did one with Ben Nelson in Nebraska. He was giving extra money to Mary Landrieu in Louisiana. I mean, he did whatever he needed to do to get that bill across the finish line. John Thune was kind of doing the same thing. But we already heard the House Freedom Caucus said, look, this is not what they've changed it too much. This is not what we agreed on. They're not sticking to the framework. And so they're chirping. And now it's like, John Thune took this big shit sandwich and just threw it right in Mike Johnson's lap. It's like, here, you deal with it now. You get it done. So we'll see whether he's able to do that or not. If they can't, then maybe they go to conference and try and come up with some compromise. But obviously the easiest thing, the best thing for Republicans is just to get the House to pass the Senate version and get it over to the president for his signature. But I don't know. I still think it's going to happen, but man, it is going to be really, really tough.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that the House will just rubber stamp this at this point, Carl. But it could happen, I guess. This was, I think, the longest sort of votorama, as they call it, in Senate history.
Yeah, it went on, and they may have to do it again if the House doesn't just affirm it. President Trump wanted this by July 4th. Well, he's not going to get that, but what he's going to get is a vote in the House next Wednesday. And when I first came to Washington, any significant legislation would end up in a House Senate Conference Committee. Those muscles have atrophied. There are well-known members of the Senate and House don't really know how that works because, I mean, they do on paper, but they don't really understand how it works. And they haven't done it in a meaningful way. But the problem is that you've got some of these very conservative members are old, fiscal hawks. And, you wouldn't think that anybody who voted for this bill could even, look with a straight face and say that they're a deficit hawk. But the Senate, in order to get Josh Hawley on board, they had to, double the amount they're given to Medicaid, to rural hospitals. But a lot of that money will be paid to doctors and nurses in hospitals who treat Medicaid patients. They had to fiddle with the overtime provision, the no tax on tips, make it means tested. They had to do these things. And, Mike Johnson has like 2 votes to spare. So I think what these Republicans, some of these people like Chip Roy and some of these purists are going to have to realize that, Joe Biden's not president now. Now it's Donald Trump. And do they want to hand Donald Trump a stinging defeat that will not, risk all the opprobrium he will heap on their heads? But more than that, hamstring and cripple the president of their own party. That's the problem here. And, I think, Tom, were you telling me, didn't Trump take Rand Paul to go golfing? Wasn't enough.
No, he's golfed with him in the past. But
but
I don't know that he's golfing with him these days.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't enough. Rand Paul just thought this thing was fiscally irresponsible. And the other thing is, meanwhile, they're not getting any help from the Democrats. And we always talk about this, like the party in power, quote, in power. You got a 3-vote margin in the Senate, half dozen votes in the House. What happens in these situations is the most extreme members of the in power party collude with every member of the opposition party. Mm-hmm. And, and then you get chaos, which the out of power party for the last 10 years in this country seems to have no compunction about doing that and no concern that they might have to cast a responsible vote themselves.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if they didn't have Vance in their pocket, whether they could have gotten a certain senator from Pennsylvania maybe to move. I don't know. The three Republicans who voted against it: Rand Paul, Tom Tillis of North Carolina, who's also decided not to run for Senate again, and Susan Collins of Maine. Tom, those are the three holdouts who are probably in the target zone for the White House right now, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, look, Susan Collins is running again. Tom Tillis, as you mentioned, is not. Look, but I don't know whether they're going to be able to do this. This whole thing has been a total high wire act. There is no plan B. There's no fallback. There's no nothing. It's like it's this, or disaster, and that's helped this thing get through thus far by the skin of its teeth through the House and the Senate. But to Carl's point, I think it'll probably, because the stakes are so high, it'll help Mike Johnson, and Donald Trump's going to lean on folks really, really hard to get this done. But you just never know, because it won't take but one or two folks to decide to pull the ripcord, and this thing will go down in flames. So it's going to be the drama is not over. It's still ongoing. And look, if Trump gets this, it'll put a cap on what has been a great couple of weeks for him overseas and domestically. If he doesn't, suddenly the narrative goes from Donald Trump had all these victories to, total disaster, and his agenda's in shambles.
Yeah. Having said that, if Mike Johnson can pull this off, I mean, he's Sam Rayburn, right?
It would be, yes. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking today that John Thune is about the happiest guy in Washington right now. And Speaker's
I was just going to say, give
happy.
Thune his props too, Carl.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, this whole thing has led to the reemergence of Elon Musk as well. He seemed to have gone away for a couple of weeks, but he's back. He's tweeting. Is
he off his meds, Andy?
Well, I don't know about that, but he certainly he does not love the president right now, and he does not love this bill at all. Tom, the reemergence of Elon Musk, what do you make of it?
Maybe he's back on the ketamine. Look, we had this massive blow up a couple weeks ago, and it got really personal, and then they seemed to mend fences, and then here comes Elon Musk, swinging again last night, saying, if whoever you should hang your head in shame if you vote for this bill, and if you do, the last thing I do on earth will be to primary you and make sure that you don't. And then he says, I'm starting a new party. As soon as this thing passes, I'm gonna start the America Party, and so we'll see if he makes good on his threats. And then, Trump turned around today and was like, listen, this is not a game that Elon wants to play with me. And he's getting all these subsidies. He's the most subsidized person in America. And if we cut these subsidies out, he may have to go back to South Africa, and no more rocket launches and no more cars. And it's gotten, again, pretty personal pretty quickly. And we'll see where this goes. But
wait, Tom, one cautionary tale, though. Today, this very day, when President Trump was in Florida, the alligator Alcatraz, Andy loves that phrase, so I'll use it. Ron DeSantis was there. This was the guy, the governor of Florida, who Trump spent the better part of 2 years disparaging in the most, not just personal terms, but juvenile terms. Ron DeSanctimonious just attacked him and when this meeting was over today, Trump thanked DeSantis by name and went up to him afterwards. You had to be watching C-SPAN to see that, because they didn't cut away. You know how their cameras are. And he patted him but with both shoulders. It was like he almost embraced the guy. Meanwhile, Marco Rubio, those two started out in public life talking about, basically he reduced Rubio to talking about penis size between these two guys. You talk about bad blood. Now he's the secretary of everything in foreign policy. So, this Elon Musk, it may have a third and fourth chapter, is what I was thinking about that today. But what I don't understand is, what's his beef? What's his specific complaint about the bill? Is he a newfound deficit hawk? Is it what Trump says, that he's not getting the subsidies for renewables? Why is he dead set against this bill?
That's the thing that doesn't really make any sense, because he's complaining that it doesn't, that it raises the deficit and spends all this money. And so he's not arguing for them to spend more money on his subsidies. He's arguing that they should be cutting more. and that they didn't cut enough, and that this isn't a fiscally responsible bill. So, and he's said before, look, he's all in favor of getting those subsidies out of the legislation, and he doesn't need them, doesn't want them, is what he says. Trump's making it sound like it's a different story, but I think Musk is arguing that this bill is fiscally irresponsible.
Yeah. Well, Trump is threatening to unleash Doge on Elon. He said today, the Department of Government Efficiency, quote, is the monster that might have to go back and eat Elon. And he also said that he would have to take a look at deporting Elon Musk. So
deportation.
Yeah. So,
after they do
I guess there's always, a route back to friendship for these guys, but it is pretty personal this time around. I guess it's been that way for a while now, but anyway, we're gonna have to leave it there.
The greatest reality show of all time, though, when you watch it. I mean, there's always a new plot twist.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. And, we're talking about personal feuds. Another big Washington feud, Jerome Powell and the president. And today, Jerome Powell, he's the Fed chair, shot back at Trump, blamed Trump's policies for his decision not to lower interest rates. This is what he said. He said, we went on hold when we saw the size of the tariffs. This was today when he was in a meeting in Europe. All inflation forecasts for the United States went up materially. So, Carl, the Fed chair is independent of the White House, but Trump is really going after him on his decision to hold steady interest rates. What do you make of the feud between these two guys?
Well, Powell escalated things today. He didn't just say what we thought was his position. The Fed chairman doesn't usually hold press conference and keep us in mind of his thinking. But what we assumed was that he was afraid that the inflation hasn't been tamed. It looks good, the numbers look good, but that if he cut rates too much, it would bring back inflation. That's what we assumed. Today, he said something a little different than that. He amplified on that, Andy. He was basically saying that he thinks tariffs are inflationary. Now, so far they haven't been. So far, what they've done is raise $80 billion for the U.S. Treasury, but most economists expect at some point they will be inflationary. And although he didn't mention it, the big beautiful bill may be inflationary. So what you have is you're adding to the federal debt, having $1 trillion plus deficits, annual deficits, and you've got these tariffs that are going to fall. At some point the companies who are paying the tariffs are going to raise their prices. So he's saying, if Trump wants me to lower the interest rate, he needs to have a coherent tariff policy that I, Jerome Powell, approve of. It upped the ante.
Now, is that the problem, Tom? Is it the incoherence of the policy, or is it the policy itself?
I think it's the policy itself. Again, tariffs are, I think Jerome Powell is sort of a traditional guy. I mean, and there were a lot of people who believe the same thing, which is that tariffs are taxes and they're going to be inflationary. They're going to raise prices. And as Carl said, that hasn't come to pass yet. But Powell said, look, we're going to wait. He's had this sort of wait and see approach. He's talked about it a number of times. That's going to continue through. They got a meeting, I think, at the end of July, and they want to see more data. And obviously this is driving Trump crazy because he, and the Caroline Levitt gave it,
which is not far to go usually, but
held up this chart, with that Trump had delivered a handwritten note to Jerome Powell saying, these are the interest rates of all the major countries around the world. And we're like, we should be up here or down here, I guess, with the lower rate. Instead, we're, down toward the bottom with higher rates. And he's saying, Trump's argument is that, we're losing billions and billions of dollars because we're paying higher interest on our debt. And, that's irresponsible, and that Powell should be sort of ahead of the curve instead of, he calls him, too late, Jerome, too late Powell. That's his derogatory nickname for the Fed chair. There's talk that Trump might, announce his pick to be Fed chair. So Powell's term ends in May of next year.
Is it going to be Rubio?
Not going to be Marco Rubio.
He gets every job that comes open.
Gets every job. No, but to undermine Powell and have sort of a shadow chair that's out there talking to markets as well. He's got 3 names on the short list. I think one of them is Scott Bessent moving over from Treasury. One of them is Kevin Hassett, who is he actually wrote a piece that's on RealClearPolitics this morning, who's on his Council of Economic Advisors. And then Kevin Warsh is another guy who's been mentioned repeatedly as a finalist for this job. So we'll see whether, and I guess there's a board seat coming open in February, and that they might use that as an opportunity to again try and undermine Powell, and there's talk of firing him. I don't know that Trump has the authority to do that, and certainly the media would go nuts and the Democrats would go nuts because the Fed is supposed to be independent. So Trump right now is just attacking him, with these public displays, and as Carl said, Powell's kind of holding his ground and firing back, pushing back a little bit.
Yeah, this other than sort of rhetoric, Carl, what the president really can't do anything about what the Fed chairman decides, right? I mean, he can't fire him, or no president has fired him to date, right?
Well, he doesn't have the statutory authority to fire him, but you can make him feel so uncomfortable. Maybe he'd resign. It can't be pleasant to have the president of the United States calling you names by name. He's a banker. It's not the world.
He's in pretty good company in terms
I know, but it's a rough and tumble politics. But that's not really what he signed up for. I mean, maybe the idea is he signed, I don't need this. There is one thing that the president says, though, that's right. Tom mentioned it. This tremendous interest we're paying on the debt, on the federal debt every year. Powell doesn't like how big the deficits are, but if the interest rate was lower, the government would have the cost of the government would be less. So it's a chicken and the egg issue, and Trump's right about that, but Powell thinks he's right about tariffs. So it's a standoff. I don't know who's going to blink first, to use the old Dean Rusk phrase.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about the Democrats. They have announced, I think just this week, that they are launching what is called an organizing summer. It's an initiative to build enthusiasm for the party and register voters in key elections later this year in 2026. I hate to tell them, but it's July 4th weekend. I mean, if you're going to organize for the summer, it's a little like, it reminds me a little bit of like my friends who would wait until after high school graduation and say, hey, I'm going to get a summer job. And it's like, you're not going to get a summer job.
Not only that, they announced it on the week of the 4th of July when nobody's paying attention.
Right. So, Tom, what do you make of the organizing summer? And
it's such a catchy phrase too. I mean, it just really, it pops. It really makes you think. No, look,
it's no alligator Alcatraz, is it?
Yeah, it's no alligator Alcatraz.
Right. Democrats are struggling, continue to struggle. And with, finding their way, finding their message, I do think, so going back to the one big, beautiful bill in the passage, Chuck Schumer gave his own press conference afterwards and said, listen, we fought hard for this. And we won the battle with public opinion. It's 2-1 against this bill. And when people get kicked off of their Medicaid, and when people lose their SNAP, their food stamps and their other assistance, we're going to remind them that this was the day that it happened. Republicans were the ones that made it happen. So I feel like the Democrats, they feel like they might have gotten something politically out of this marathon, trying to get this bill through or oppose it from getting through. And that might help them. But the organizing summer stuff just seems kind of lame and more of the same. The Democrats have been kind of flailing about trying to generate any sort of enthusiasm or breakthrough in any way. But as you pointed out, Andy, it's like if you want to make a big splash, this is probably not the week to do it. You probably would have wanted to start earlier, and you probably would have wanted to come up with something that's a little bit more headline grabbing, a little catchier than organizing summer.
Well, I want to give them their due because this is the press release that they released about this, Carl. They said the Democrats will be, quote, equipping volunteers to authentically enter conversation in non-political spaces, both within their personal networks and in their communities, online and in person, such as sports forums, community groups, book clubs, and on social media platforms. So one more reason to quit a book club, I think. They're going to bring politics into these.
So they're going to go into sports chat rooms and start harassing people about politics. That's a great idea.
I mean, it just seems so tone deaf, but and small ball, I guess, too.
Well, what the people who run the Democratic National Committee have to do is, reconcile the base, the left-wing base, the progressive base, the people who voted for Zohran Mamdani, people who voted for Bernie Sanders. And they have to, you have these people like Cory Booker, who did a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, one man filibuster. These people are sort of street theater, acting out, but in a way that they think draws attention to the excesses of Donald Trump's policies. And then the other side, you have these people who are old school Democrats who said, we need to motivate our voters. We need to raise more money from the grassroots. We need to register young people. We need to do these nuts and bolts things that aren't as sexy. And I think my guess is that organizing summer is an attempt to bridge those two approaches. So they,
You're very kind.
They're doing both at once.
You're very kind, because it seems to me that if your plan to retake the political high ground is you're going to get book clubs and sports, online sports forums to talk about politics, you're grasping at straws.
And it's also contrived. Like, they're going to authentically talk about, in these spaces. I mean, it's just all gobbledygook. I mean,
yeah.
Anyone
who uses the word authentic, it's inauthentic.
If you can't fake authenticity, what can you fake?
All right. Well, guys, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. We'll be back right after these words. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm here with Tom and Carl. And Carl, today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced the official closing of the USAID. He said this. He said, development objectives have rarely been met, instability has often worsened, and anti-American sentiments has only grown. This era of government-sanctioned inefficiency has officially come to an end. So, Carl, are you celebrating the death of AID?
No, I'm not. Now that Marco Rubio has, made a forceful case, and he sometimes reads some of the excessive, some of the goofier policies, gay comic books in Rwanda, or I'm making that up, but that kind of thing. But that was a fraction of the expenditures. Meanwhile, the Lancet says that 14 million people around the world will die because USAID's budget's being cut.
And if it's in the Lancet, it's the word of God.
I did a piece many years ago with National Journal. The Lancet had an article about how many people had died in Iraq, and it was 10 times the real number. It was just a very very politicized study, I thought. So I don't put a lot of stock in that. But you can't say the number's zero. The question is, if the United States doesn't want to do this, is there another country that can or will? Should wealthy nations support poor nations? Should they support healthcare and the most barren parts of the world? And I think most Americans would say yes. But was AID wasting money? Could this be done better? And Andy, it's like the Voice of America conversation we had. You and I see similarly on that. I don't think you throw the whole thing out. I mean, that's Donald Trump and Marco Rubio didn't ask my opinion, but that would be my opinion.
Well, his complaint about USAID was that when he was a senator, he could never get a straight answer out of them as to how the money was used. And by moving it under the State Department, they will have more control, and it'll be more aligned with the government's foreign policy objectives. And Tom, I think there's some wisdom in that, and there's also a little bit of I put it this way. I think what you really have to look at is what programs are being cut and what programs are being kept alive, as opposed to whether it's done through USAID or the State Department, right? I mean, that's just a bureaucratic question.
I agree. And they're not shutting it down completely. They are cutting it back and moving it back under the State Department. So now you could argue they've cut too much, cut too far, and cut out critical programs that were doing, good things around the world. But I think that the case that Marco Rubio has made for the reasons that USAID had to be sort of completely, reformed and scrutinized are legitimate and in some ways laudable. And so I don't have a problem with this. And all these articles about how many people are going to die and around the world. I mean, it's just, there was a headline in a story the other day that, Republicans have voted to kill, 3 million people or something. It's like, it doesn't even like register with people anymore, that it's so overwrought. We have part of, Donald Trump's America First philosophy is we need to be doing more at home, less around the world, right? Spending less money overseas. And this is part of that. And I'm sure there are lots of people who disagree with that and think we should be spending tons of money overseas because it promotes democracy and does all these wonderful things and helps America's image around the world. But, we've been doing that for a long time. And right now the pendulum's shifting in the other direction.
Well, we've been doing it for a long time, and it's kind of worked. I mean, the thing, we can criticize. We talked about the VOA, we've talked about USAID, but they have been important tools in the foreign policy makers up to this point, and the functions have to continue. You cannot run a government. You can't be the world's sole superpower and not be involved in foreign aid and not be involved in telling your story abroad, because you can't cede that territory. It doesn't become a vacuum. That's where Russia and China step in and fill those voids, and it affects your ability to get things done around the world.
Okay, well, that's fine. But one of the things that was shocking to a lot of Americans, and myself included, when Doge started getting in there and looking at this USAID stuff, is that this was, in many ways, these programs were like slush funds for Democrats and for progressive causes and principles. And, Stacey Abrams starts an organization, and 6 months later, she's getting $20 billion, in grants. I mean,
well, that was the Department of Energy, but
okay, but I mean, we saw this across. I mean, there was a lot of that at USAID as well, and that kind of stuff there was so much excess. And it became sort of, as Marco Rubio has said, sort of this almost independent organization, right? Charitable organization that didn't report to anyone, wasn't accountable. They were spending millions and billions of dollars. And all that stuff, I think we were right to address that and to try and, reform that and pare it back.
Yeah. Well, can I add one point to that, Andy? Right. I didn't really know, and I'd been writing about them for years, that non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that most of this money was coming from the government for a lot of these NGOs. I didn't know that, and I assumed that they were charitable organizations. They're, if it's government money, it's just being laundered through them. Is that? I think people were surprised.
Not non-governmental.
They're not non-governmental. They're governmental agencies without congressional oversight. Yeah. I think that's it was a fair criticism.
Yeah, no, I just want to be clear on this, Tom. I think you and I are in agreement, which is that we want to do these functions. These functions are important to running a foreign policy in this regard, but we want to do it efficiently and we want to do it right. I think there's a part of the MAGA movement that believes that we can disengage from the world and not do these things, that we don't have to be engaged in a war of ideas, or we don't have to be engaged in helping third world countries reform their economies. And I just think they're wrong. I think you have to be engaged. I guess that's my difference with that part of the MAGA wing. But Carl, no, you want to disengage.
Megyn Kelly's going to call you a globalist. Get ready. Right. Get ready for the comments.
I couldn't have said any better, Andy.
Well, so the other part of this story, Carl, and Susan Crabtree has a great piece on this on RealClearPolitics, is that today Marco Rubio set as the deadline, he's dismissing 15% of the State Department. That's a big cut in an agency that really isn't big. The State Department is not sort of a huge, sprawling government bureaucracy. It's relatively small as these things go.
Well, Andy, you know this. I mean, since the days Richard Nixon was in the House of Representatives, there are certain movement conservatives have considered the State Department a very suspect organization, run by anti-American elites, if not outright communists. And yeah, I've known people work for the state. I've known people, because I live in Washington, work for the State Department. I think most of them signed up for the right reasons and doing the right thing. Is this agency too large? Maybe. And And we've talked about this many times when Elon Musk and his bros were going through with these agencies with chainsaws. There's a lack of process here that makes you wonder if they're going to get rid of people who are really doing a very good job for America. If they've spent enough time, if you're going to downsize, look, we did it at Real Clear Politics. It is a painful thing, or should be. If it's not painful to you, I don't want to talk about you, but it should be a hard thing. You're telling somebody that their profession, they're no longer wanted in their job. And it seems to me the best way to do this through attrition, through, pay freezes, and, to do it gradually. This is an abrupt thing. It's going to hurt morale at the State Department. And I just hope Rubio knows what he's doing.
Tom, what do you think? 15% cut?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I mean, I think all these government agencies could be cut 15%, and we'd be fine. Everything would still happen. I mean, there's plenty of bloat there, and the problem is, Carl, is that there's a window of opportunity to make these kinds of changes, and doing it gradually just doesn't work. I mean, in theory, yes, you'd want to go through every single employee and go through, make sure they're doing a good job and they're not duplicative and all of this other stuff, right? Before you single out the ones that you're going to end up letting go. But that would take years. I mean, tens of years, way longer than any administration, certainly way longer than the Trump administration had when they came in with effectively a mandate to do this kind of stuff, or at least some of it. And so you just have to, you remember when this was going on, Kevin Leary, Mr. Wonderful, was on CNN, and he was like, cut. I want way more cuts. And then once you've cut, then you can go back and add people back when you figure out, what exactly you're missing, or what you needed that you might have let go.
Like Farsi speakers on
like
Radio
Farsi
Free.
speakers at the VOA. That's a perfect example of why you would, why and how you would do it that way, as opposed to doing it the other way, which is we keep on, Farsi speakers and all these other folks who we don't necessarily need, and we try and weed them out over the next 18 months, 2 years or something. It just it's not.
You're talking about people's life. You're talking about people's livelihoods and their profession and their chosen line of work, and what they, you're wreaking the idea that you work for the government somehow you're a
go
lesser.
Look at the business page. There were people probably laid off yesterday. Thousands of workers at corporations all around the country. They're people too.
I don't favor that either.
Federal employees are not different.
I might have to go to work
Carl
for
would never fire
Donnie.
anybody ever.
Yeah, I don't believe in
All
it.
right. Hey guys, we got this is great, but we got to leave it here. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Mr. Wonderful himself, Tom Bevan, and Carl Cannon. We'll be back with more right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. And for our next segment, RCP contributor Maggie Miller talks with Real Clear Investigations reporter John Murawski about his recent piece uncovering how public libraries have evolved into hubs of ideological activism during Gay Pride Month, which wrapped up yesterday. Here's Maggie Miller in conversation with John Murawski.
John, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, you're welcome.
So what prompted you to investigate this in the first place? Was it community concern, or did you just notice this kind of building over time?
Last year during a Pride Month, I just happened to, I'm a casual recreational bicyclist, and it's the group of people that bikes. We go as a group, and afterwards we're having a beer, and I just asked a couple people, do you think it's unusual that a public library, which is a nonpartisan government institution, would be aggressively promoting a constituency of the Democratic Party in a nonpartisan building? And doesn't it seem to you as if they had a Second Amendment month, or if they had pro-life month, or just some very controversial cause that they would pick for one political party and promote and pretend it's nonpartisan and pretend it's not political? And so I mentioned this to 3 people, and they all basically thought I was crazy. This is just about pride. Do you have a problem with gay pride? They kept on saying gay pride, gay. And I knew even then that that the queer movement had moved far beyond gayness, right? So they were like talking like it's still 1985, like they're pretending it's 1985. So after the third time this happened, I had breakfast with this guy. It was like June 29th, and I said the same thing. And he goes, John, do you have a problem with gay people? So I said, okay, I think what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to to my local library and look at some of these books and see what's in them. And I'll send you some photos, and then you'll decide whether it's appropriate or not. And what I found is what I wrote about. But that was last year. It was at the end of the month, so I didn't have time to because they were going to take down the display within a day. So I had like a day, and so I looked at these books. I sent my friend a bunch of photos. He said, John, stop sending these photos. You've made your point. This is not appropriate. So what I did was I made a vow that this time to come back at the beginning of the month and do the same thing, spend the first week immersing myself in this material and seeing what it represents. And the premise of the story is you think that this is gay pride. It's actually everything that's short of basically bestiality and and pedophilia. Pretty much everything that's short of bestiality and pedophilia is represented here. I mean, there's kink, there's polyamory, there's fetishism, BDSM. And so that's the pattern that I saw. And so this time I could tell the world, not just go back and report to my friends who wouldn't believe me anyway, but I could just report back to the world in a systematic way what's in these books. There's in our library system, Wake County, which is Raleigh, North Carolina, is in Wake County, and a couple of other surrounding towns. The library system has about 24 libraries. I went to 8 of them, which is a third of them, and sampled a bunch of books. And what I saw is this pattern of advocacy for basically overthrow of Western civilization, which is capitalism, marriage, heterosexuality, Christianity. All these things are lumped together. They're all created by white Westerners and imposed upon the world. And liberation involves breaking the chain from those ideologies. And when you break that chain, you will enter the world where we're no longer bound by gender binaries. We live as we were naturally, as nature intended, which is we are naturally queer. And we don't live in a state of sexual repression. We live in a state of sexual exuberance. And that's what nature intended. And so that's what you find in this material. So there's a political component, at all ages, and there's this component celebrating breaking the gender binaries, celebrating kids who overcome their doubts and commit to puberty blockers and commit to hormones and commit to being trans. Those are kids who are brave, they're nonconformists, they're bucking the trend, and they're saying no to those evil little devils who are their parents.
So libraries are obviously meant to be a place of learning, exploration, education. So how could this mission be carried out in an educational way rather than what you seem to have found, which felt almost like a promotional one?
Yeah, so I personally have no problem with the libraries having these books on the shelves. But what they've done is they've set up tables and displays, typically at the entrance to the library, and they're very festive with flags, like pride flags, but also flags for every single pride identity, like polyamory, bisexual, demisexual, asexual, polysexual, pangender. They have separate flags for that. So they're officially promoting, government agents are promoting polyamory. And this is for kids. Most of these books are for kids. And so it's not that they're in the library, it's that they're being selected to say, they're put on an exhibit, and the librarians are saying, this is what pride is. So it's not what you think pride is. It's what they're telling us that pride is and what's in the books. And what's in the books aligns with what the librarians are telling us that pride is when they display the flags. And so it's a very broad spectrum of queer proclivities, interests, identities. You could, fetishes. It's a whole range of sexual behavior. It's everything that's outside heterosexuality and outside of cisgenderism.
And so children are naturally super impressionable people, and obviously with your investigating, you saw that these books go all the way down to 2 years old, and telling people to question what they are and who they are and what they identify as. So if children are told something is inherently bad or a certain identity may be superior, are they more likely then to adopt that view? Do you think that the general public understands just how broad and maybe sometimes how explicit this material has become?
I don't think the general public understands. I think most people think this is about gay dignity, gay relationships and hugging couples. Are kids impressionable? Why else would you put these books out? Why do we have children's literature? It's to shape their character. It's about character formation. It's about messaging to children what is normative, what is acceptable, why else would these books say you should be accepting and you should be loving of all people? Why do these books say what they say? If children weren't impressionable, then we could say the opposite and queer advocates wouldn't care. They would say, I don't care what you say about queer people. You can have queer phobia all day long. It doesn't change anything because people's identities are set in stone from birth. But everybody knows that our society shapes its citizens and its members by the messaging and the education and the values that it imparts to people. It doesn't, our society doesn't have like 100% control of individual human beings, but it influences the way people perceive the world.
So just for devil advocate's sake of, introducing children to topics that they might hear of just being out in the world, obviously people don't necessarily shelter children as much as they once did. With the internet, with access to everything, they do have this information more readily available to them at a young age. Do you think that in some ways that might be what the library is trying to do, is providing it in this respect, or do you think it just has gone too far?
There's a lot of things you can get on the internet. You can get white supremacist materials on the internet. You can get gun violence on the internet. You can find hardcore pornography on the internet. You can find misogyny on the internet, but the library isn't putting out a display table for that and celebrating it. So clearly they're putting on the display tables represent the values of the library system and of the county government. And the library system is largely getting its marching orders from the American Library Association, which has been active on this issue for a long time and provides training materials, talking points and scripts to librarians, for parents. For the ALA, the American Library Association, is having its annual meeting in the last week of June, which is now, and they have, I include in my article examples from some of the panels, and it's all about promoting this literature to children and message and this messaging.
You mentioned patriarchal vanguard was mentioned with the American Library Association resisting that and engaging with advocacy groups. So it definitely does seem that there is a certain politicization of the American Library Association. Obviously, the people in support of what the library is doing will argue that, white supremacy and violence is not the same as being, promoting people's gender. But I obviously understand that there is definitely a politicization.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be that. I mean, yeah. I mean, you just gave examples of what's on the internet. So I'm just saying we can find lots of things on the internet. But there are all sorts of Republican conservative values, like traditional family values, abstinence, just say no, virginity, traditional sex roles, traditional gender roles that progressives would find. They would say spreading that information corrupts the youth. It implants in their minds bad ideas that cause trauma and harm, and it causes people to become bigots. So we don't want to do that. We want to implant good ideas. This is what the ALA and the progressive vanguard believe to be good ideas. And those good ideas include references to BDSM, fetishism, polyamory, polysexualism, polygender, agender, asexual, demisexual. A demisexual, by the way, is part of that queer pantheon. A demisexual is a person. It's interesting only in this sense because of how they name it. They call it demisexual. Demi means half or partial. So a demisexual is a person who has to have an emotional attachment and an emotional attraction, an emotional bond of someone before they have sex. So that would probably describe a lot of what we call normal people. But it's named demisexual as if it's only partially sexually developed, as if you're sexually stunted, like you're half repressed and half sexual, because there is still that boundary you have to overcome, or that barrier, which is the emotional attachment. And a truly liberated person has fewer restraints on what they like and how they express their sexuality. And emotion doesn't get in the way. I would say I actually was shocked that these books are so explicit and so politically overt, and they're aimed at children. At most, you'll get passive acquiescence from people who are afraid of being labeled bigot. But that's not the same thing as real support. And as soon as the tables turn and as soon as the political winds shift, those people who are passively acquiescing, just like corporations who went all in on DEI and then just dumped DEI at the first opportunity, you don't really have support. You have the illusion of public support, and largely it's through intimidation and fear. And it's not a good strategy, and it ultimately makes enemies, and it causes hardships for people who are gay, bi, lesbian, and trans, because it just leaves bad. It's a very militant, aggressive, coercive approach.
That was Maggie Miller in conversation with Real Clear Investigations writer John Murawski. You can see more of Maggie's interviews at the Real Clear Politics YouTube channel and on realclearinvestigations.com. And that's our program for today. On behalf of everyone at RCP, thank you for being here. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great evening.